911, what is the address of the emergency?
Hi, I just drove on North Hudson Street in Chester, and I just saw a body on the side of the road. I'm not sure if it was. I drove past it twice.
Okay, slow down now. Tell me exactly what happened.
It looked just like a pile of clothes, but as I got closer, I saw shoes, and I think it was a person.
I'm gonna have him over there as soon as possible.
Two patrol units, they come up onto the scene. And right away, they realize this is a person that's been bound up and is obviously bloody.
His arms were tied and bound behind his back, and his feet were also bound and tied. He was unconscious and his breathing was very labored. The officers noticed several bruises and contusions to his face. It was about 15 degrees. It was freezing. He had a jacket, his jeans or pants, and he didn't have shoes on. Officers called for an ambulance and he was immediately rushed to the hospital.
We knew his name was Michael Partridge. We knew that he was a resident of Chester. He's got a family. He's got a grandfather. He's got a mother. He's got a child.
He was left on the side of the road in the middle of winter, essentially hogtied, and just left for dead.
Michael Gregory Partridge was my son. We had a very special relationship. We were more best friends than father and son. We were just there for each other.
I remember when he was born, he was so sweet and so cute. Michael was very outgoing, always making people laugh. Very loyal and devoted to his family.
Growing up, he was always very protective of his sister and mother. We were all very close.
Michael had a 3-year-old son, Michael Jr. Baby Mikey was the love of his life.
I love you.
I love you.
Him and Michael Jr. were attached at the hip. Like, you couldn't get them apart.
That was the one thing I think he was most proud of in his life, is being a dad.
I see you.
He became a great father, and it brought us all closer.
Sometimes we wanted to pull our hair out with him. Michael didn't always make the right choices. It was very frustrating for all of us.
My son had drug problems, but he was fighting it hard. He couldn't get that demon off his back right away.
He wasn't perfect, but we loved him unconditionally, no matter what.
We get to the hospital, and they told me, I'm sorry, there's nothing we could do. It was shocking.
Family members mentioned Courtney Clemenza as being Michael's girlfriend. Courtney lives with her mother, Regina Clemenza.
We went to the residence and we made contact with Regina, and Courtney Clemenza is not at home. We advised her that Michael Partridge was found assaulted. Regina said that she had a text conversation with Courtney earlier that night about Michael Partridge.
This text exchange is the first real lead on how this happened. Courtney says he got his ass kicked. Regina responds, did he? By who? Courtney responds, Bobby. He broke his ankle ribs. I saw his blood squirting while he cried, Bobby, stop.
Based on the text messages, Courtney has witnessed a brutal assault of Michael Partridge at the hands of a specific person she referred to as Bobby.
Where that scene is, we still have yet to determine. We really need to find Courtney Clemenza.
Okay, seat right there, Gina. I'm gonna sit here. What did you hear exactly happened?
I hear somebody threw him a beating.
Who did you hear threw him a beating?
I guess her friend Bobby.
Who'd you hear this from?
Courtney.
Courtney told you
I
that.
didn't hear it, she texted him.
What did she say specifically happened to him?
He got him good in his ankles and his ribs, I think. That's what he said.
The person who got him good was...
But I think it was Bobby.
If Courtney's not home, where would she be?
Bobby and Seth's house.
From Regina Clemenza, we get the name Seth Pelsang and Robert Haskell. Courtney is hanging out with them that night.
It was decided that having Regina call Courtney would be our best shot at Courtney responding. You always pick up for your mom.
Hello. What's up? Are you at my house right now?
Where are you?
I'm in the police station. I've been here since 1 o'clock in the morning because of you and your douchebag friend. You know what I mean? Where are you? My house or Bobby's house? Because the cops want to talk to you, that's why.
Courtney, we just want, this investigative road, we just want to meet up with you, make sure you're okay. Where can I meet you?
Quick check in Goshen, is that fine with you?
Yeah, quick check in Goshen. We'll see you there in a couple minutes.
We gathered up a couple teams and we went over to the gas station.
We're set up. A car pulls in. Courtney gets out of it and she goes into the quick check. I go to the car. I could see there's someone else in the passenger seat. I get him out. I notice there's a person not moving, sitting real quiet in the back. I get him out.
We were greeted by not only Courtney Clemenza, but she brought Bobby, which is Robert Haskell, and Seth as well.
There were already folks that we knew that we needed to speak to, and they just fall right into our lap. Definitely a huge break.
Have a seat, Courtney.
I want to take that chair, if you don't mind. My desk here. Thank you, sir.
We know some went down, so we need to talk to you about what you might know about that. All right?
Seth resides in the same house as Robert Haskell, but we didn't know if he was involved in the assault or not.
Talk us through your day. I woke up in the morning and went and got Courtney, and she came back to Goshen with me. Okay.
To your home address.
Mm-hmm. Where was Bobby? He was at Palace.
Seth was tough. Right out of the gate, he's closed off. He had almost no eye contact. He was very fidgety, couldn't sit still in his chair. You can see him look up at the camera a number of times. Everything was screaming dishonesty.
What goes on there?
We hung out and just...
That's actually a 20-second delay before he says anything. And when that happens, it's important to let them break the silence.
I don't know what to do here. I don't want to incriminate myself or anything. Truthfully, what happened? This is important, Seth. I know. That's why I've been thinking about it. It's very vital for you to be honest.
It's the brave thing to do, and you know it's the right thing to do.
Can I hand him time? He just wants to have a cigarette. That's right, please. Yeah, I mean, we can.
I figured
he's gonna have his cigarette and we're gonna come in and we're gonna start seeing results.
All right. So we're back where we left off. Then what? And then we were all just hanging out, made some food and stuff, macaroni and cheese and stuff like that. Okay. And then what? I think I do need a lawyer present. I continue. Sorry. All right.
coming back in after that cigarette break, I didn't see it coming. I was quite surprised that he would ask for a lawyer.
When somebody requests an attorney, the interview ends at that point. It was definitely frustrating.
All right. Unfortunately, you still can't leave. We're going to be here for a bit because everybody else is talking. So we got to, see where the cards are going to fall.
Seth was just on standby until we completed the other interviews. I think the more he thought about it, he went into self-preservation mode. He relayed to one of the troopers that he had changed his mind and that he wanted to speak to us now.
All right, Seth.
Seth had lawyered up, so this is a very delicate situation. We're able to listen to what he has to say, but we can't continue with questioning because it'll get thrown out.
Go ahead and say whatever you need to say. Me and Courtney were sitting down in the living room, and obviously we were watching TV and eating like macaroni and cheese and everything, and all of a sudden we heard a big bang from outside, and we were like, what the hell? It was Mike. He had a gun. He took the shotgun and he shot through the front door of the house. He came right in with that shotgun loaded, and he started chasing us up the stairs. And I ran into my room, and I opened my door and I saw there's a guy that stays across the hall from me. He had him like pinned down, had him, like subdued or whatever. And then Bobby just started hitting him with the bat. I thought to like subdue him at first, He slid him down the stairs and then brought him outside. So then they got a tarp, put it in the back seat, and put Mike in there. And Bobby made us go with him and drop him off like over by his house. Okay. Sit tight for me for a second.
He's willing to tell us that he saw Rob strike Michael with a baseball bat. And that's a big piece of the puzzle. Now we have Seth's version of events to compare to the other interviews.
At that point, investigators had an address for Bobby, and we were able to get warrants for the house.
Through processing the scene, we knew a door was damaged. Knew there was a struggle inside the house. Our major crimes unit advised me that a fourth person, Tim Smith, who was one of the residents of that house, had just arrived back at home. So we needed to get him interviewed to see what information, if any, he had. This guy named Mike. You ever seen him? Do you know who I'm referring to when I say this? No? Okay. What went down at the house last night?
Well, I really couldn't tell you. Like, stuff could go on and I won't be there.
There was 100% a major issue that went down at that house that you're well aware that Rob got involved in.
Why in the world would I know a story about confrontation that took place? That doesn't make any sense. Whatever went down, like I wasn't there for it. I don't know. Well, I don't know anything about that.
He was just denying any knowledge of the situation. So I'm gonna just hit him with what we know to try to gauge his response and see if that's enough to crack him.
We know exactly what happened. We know who Mike is. We know that he comes in acting crazy. You latch onto him. We know that Rob starts hitting him with the blue bat that's in the bathroom. We know this. This is not a mystery. It is what it is. Went down. Not ugly.
I'm telling you what I know. I've done that.
Okay. We'll take this step by step. Did you hear Rob in a physical altercation? Did you hear moving around?
I just heard him screaming for me. That's it.
So now what do?
I open my door, look out.
And what do you see?
There's a guy there with a rifle or something.
Okay. Then what?
You all got the gun away from him?
Did you grab the gun itself or you grabbed him?
I spread him.
You just like bear hugged him? Okay. When did Rob hit him with the bat? When you were on his back? Okay. Where did he hit him that you saw?
The feet. His feet, his legs.
Just his feet and his legs?
Yeah.
Anywhere else?
Probably in his head.
And what happens then?
I got my stuff together and I got out of there.
Okay. Courtney Clemenza's interview becomes important because we know that she's seen what happened. She texted her mother, and those text messages can't go away. It's too late. We already have them.
Puts her at the crime scene and puts her seeing a murder. You can't run from that.
It's all or nothing at this point. Was she a witness, a victim, or a participant in the death of Michael Partridge?
I miss Michael's laugh. I miss watching him interact with his son. I'll never forget what a proud dad he was. Michael's passing devastated his family. Their lives will never be the same without him.
So, this morning,
I was at my friend's house, and we were sitting in the living room.
what friend?
Stuff. And first we heard like a tapping. It wasn't even like 10, 15 minutes, and that's when we heard like a shot at the door. And like, it was just crazy. I saw it like slow motion, I swear to God. And he must have shot like at the door to open it, like with a f***ing rifle.
This was from Mike.
Yeah. He went to go lunch at my friend's house, and I just like panicked. I mean, Seth got the gun out of his hand, so I kind of just left for a little bit. I came back and Mike was gone.
Who's there when you come back?
Seth, and Bobby.
Mike wasn't there.
No.
We knew via the text messages that Courtney saw a beating occur. And she leaves that window of time out. So she's definitely hiding something. And not only hiding something, she's trying to keep us away from somewhere else.
This is your only shot. I know the text messages you sent to your mother, and I know that you witnessed it.
It was mostly Bobby, because I heard Michael say, "Bobby, stop," and I was just screaming. I was just screaming, "Stop," because I just heard the bat, but I don't know what he was doing, and I just heard Michael screaming, "Help me," and "Bobby, please stop." I kept hitting him with the bat, and then, I just heard Mike say, "Bobby, stop, Bobby, stop, stop, stop."
Where was Bobby hitting him?
He was between the back of the head, the wrist. He was hitting him every and anywhere.
With a baseball bat?
Yes.
Was it a wood baseball bat?
No,
or metal?
a metal.
It was a metal baseball bat?
Yes.
If you had a guess about how many times Bobby hit him with the bat?
It had to be at least 30. He just kept going.
Yeah, and how long did that go on for?
It was only, in reality, I think maybe 20 minutes. It seemed like a lifetime. And then they tie him up, so they were...
Pause for a second. Who said time up? Because you know Bobby said time up. Who was he talking to?
He was talking to Seth. I saw him tying his arms and his...
You saw who? Seth time? What did he tie him up with?
He cut him from the vacuum. He cut you plug into the wall to the vacuum, the cord.
They tie him up with you said they cut the vacuum cord. Yeah. Did they tie him up with anything else?
I saw duct tape. They throw him outside, and then he's just laying there, and then he's moving around, trying to get out. I did hold his arms down. I'm like, "Mike, it's going to be faster if you just stop moving around."
And what did Mike say to you?
He just, And then they brought him by the car. They took him in the Toyota, my car.
Who took him in the Toyota?
Seth and Bobby.
And where did they take him?
I told them to take him to his grandpa's.
Okay.
And they left.
She's saying, "Hey, listen, this is what I saw. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't help them at all."
Now we're trying to figure out how much did she take part in it, if at all.
Honesty is all or nothing, right? So you can't tell 80% of the truth and leave out the part where you look bad.
And he slapped me.
Who did?
Bobby.
Bobby slapped you where?
Across my face.
Okay.
He made me drive that car.
So you drove the car?
Yeah. He told me, "Get in the driver's seat now."
Who told you that?
Bobby. And that's when I knew that he just can't do anything. They were just pacing around.
And what happened then?
And on the phone and laughing, and
What was he laughing about?
he was just like, "This mother came up in my house with a gun, and I almost killed him. I should have just finished him off." And then laughing about it.
Why did Mike go there tonight in the first place?
Mike was planning to rob him.
Who's him?
Bobby.
Why Bobby?
Because he's got a big amount of cocaine, a big amount of heroin, and he's got $25,000 of cash in his house at all times.
She admits that there was a pre-planned robbery that was supposed to take place.
We're wondering how she knew about this plan. Maybe Courtney's involvement isn't as innocent as she says it is.
She's making a shift from being a witness to being an active participant.
When did Mike tell you he was planning to rob Bobby?
Last week, he was dabbling with the idea.
Robert is known to be a drug dealer. Michael was struggling with an addiction. He had no money.
He's like, "I have no more fight in me." And he just was broken down. He was crying. And he's like, "I can't do this anymore." She was like, "No, if I could get that cash, that would be, that would just get us set. We could get an apartment. We could get a car." So he was kind of the wheels were turning.
Okay.
We were going to make a plan,
what was the plan going to be?
He asked me where the rooms were, so I told him the placement of the rooms.
Did you write them down? Did you?
Yeah. It was a map of the house, just kind of a layout of the house. She was asking me, like, who lived there, and I said, you don't want to, and then I got Tim's home.
What did he specifically say?
He was asking me, like, can you get Seth and Bobby out of the house?
Mm-hmm.
But it was never a set in stone date. Because I told him I want to get them out of the house, so there was nobody there.
Why?
I didn't know what Bobby's capable of.
So you guys had this conversation about who's in the house. It would make sense if you were also discussing where the drugs are in the house.
Yeah, Bobby's room. He has, like, this little portable safe. But, like, because I said, like, I told him, like, I don't know exactly where it would be, because sometimes it's in the closet, sometimes it's under the bed, sometimes it's in Bobby's arms.
So,
there's no loyalty.
So now you're talking to Mike. You're in essence telling him where the safe may or may not be.
Yes.
That the drugs are going to be in his room. That Tim, if he's there, don't do it.
Yeah.
Did he tell you he was going to rob the place that night?
No, he did not.
If I put you on a polygraph right now.
Yeah,
okay?
I would pass.
Okay.
I swear to God.
She admits she drew a map that was ultimately located on Michael himself. He had that map. So she's a participant at this point.
You're part of this. And it got out of control.
Yeah.
From you having a conversation with Michael days before he shows up at the house, you have conversations with him about where the drugs are, who holds the drugs, how much there is, even detail a map to him.
They were not supposed to be in the house.
But they were.
Who are you with tonight?
I'm Courtney Clemenza and my friend Seth.
He was sweating profusely. It was freezing outside, and he was just sweating on the top of his head. It's a biological response, and it is telling. It means that there's somebody under stress or someone has something to hide.
So what's going on there? What are you guys doing?
Chilling, eating, watching TV.
Anybody else at the house?
No.
No? Does Courtney date anybody?
I know she had a boyfriend.
Who's the boyfriend?
I think his name is Michael or Mike or something like that.
When was the last time you saw Mike?
That's a good question. When the last time I saw Mike about, I want to say 2 days ago. Not yesterday, but the day before.
Did you talk to him at all or anything like that?
No, we don't talk right now.
He glossed over the day like nothing remarkable had happened. So 100% I knew that he was withholding information. This is the time we have to give a little bit. Let's see where it goes. But we're not going to tell Robert Haskell that Michael was dead.
If we were to start right off the bat that Michael had died, that would put up a wall that we just wouldn't be able to overcome.
Mike, right? He got beat up. That's what we're here.
So bad, like.
No, I mean, he got beat up. I mean, it's not anything that, you know, a few days rest might help him out. Okay.
You could kind of see the wheels moving in Robert's head, you know, like, wait a second, maybe I didn't beat him up that bad. I may be able to spin this story so that I am walking out the door.
I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, all right.
At that point, Robert sits up and says, you know, okay, all right, let me tell you exactly what happened.
I'm not gonna lie to you.
That right there was that was the turning point.
We need to talk about things because your version of events, there's some things missing out of there. So let's clear it up now.
I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, all right. And I appreciate it.
I live on Kid Road now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
With my friend.
Okay, what's your friend's name?
Tim.
Tim, okay. Just Tim?
Tim, Seth. Seth was there too.
Okay. So it's you, Tim, and Seth.
Courtney's our friend.
Mm-hmm.
Mike thought somebody was around with him. He comes over there. He shoots my door off with the hinges.
Kicks it.
With a shotgun.
Really?
Tim grabs him. He comes up to my room. My door is off the hinges.
The front door?
The front door he shoots.
That's number
one. Room door, he hits. Tips grabs him. We yanked the shotgun out of his hand. And beat
It was huge because prior to that, we really didn't have a solid link to him and Michael interacting that evening.
You heard the gun go off?
No, he's pointing the shotgun. Because the first one he shot.
Now it's the front door. The front door of the house.
The front door to the house.
Okay.
So when I said, I'm like, what the boom. And it was for Tim grabbing his shit. I know one of us got shot because that jammed on him. Jammed on him.
So how many times did he shoot the gun?
Once, and that second one was going to be twice.
So he makes it in the house after he shoots?
He shot the hell. Yeah, he made it in the house. Tim just grabs and dives on him. And Seth grabs, yanks the gun.
And then what happens?
Whipped his ass.
You and Tim, you whoop his ass. Punch him? Did you hit him with anything?
No, he beat his ass.
And Seth beat his ass too?
No.
And then what happens?
That was it.
Where'd Mike go?
I don't know where the he went. He left.
We know that that's not the case. Clearly, Michael did not leave on his own accord. I believe that he was trying to convince himself that all he did was beat somebody up. To Robert, he's sort of justified in those actions.
Michael's entering the house. If he's entering it with this deadly weapon, people in that house have a right to defend themselves. But once Michael is disarmed, they're no longer justified in what they do.
So there's certain things that are coming to light, okay, because other people are talking and having conversations, okay? He was tied up, correct? It's a yes?
Yes.
Okay, all right? Let me ask you a question, right? Who tied him up?
I ain't gonna lie. It was me, man. The reason why he was out of control, man. There's no way in the world I could have just did that and just let him go. So
what'd you tie him up with?
With the vacuum cleaner and a piece of bed sheet.
Like a cord?
Yeah, and a piece of bed sheet.
Okay. Where'd you guys burn him? Now listen, there's
Chester. We took him almost to his grandfather.
Okay. Now who's we? Listen, I get it, but you gotta, okay. Courtney, okay, who else? Listen, I know.
So I needed somebody to help me. I know it was wrong, but I just didn't want him over our house after that.
Yeah.
You can see it, his body language. Slumps back down, hand over top of the head. He just completely shuts down.
What was the conversation between, like, everyone in the car on the way over and the way back? Like, what kind of conversation is going on?
I'm talking to Courtney.
Yeah. What are you saying?
Like, yo, what the how the did he even follow? How the did he even get over here? Like, what's this about? Like, he acting like we did something with you. All we doing is being your friend, and we getting in all this bull with him. How the did he find out where we lived at?
Yeah.
How the did he follow your ass over here? Like, what the when are you gonna leave this motherfucker alone? Now he's coming over here.
He's starting to realize Courtney must have told Michael that Robert had drugs, had money at his residence.
Oh,
You could see him in his mind thinking, wait a second, maybe I was set up.
Oh, damn.
Maybe the whole purpose of this was for someone to come over and rob me of my drugs or my money. The more he thinks about it, the more Robert gets upset.
Man. Oh, God, man. Oh, shit. That's hurt.
He was extremely angry, extremely frustrated. He knows what took place, and he knows that we know the truth.
Who's got the baseball bat in the house?
Oh, man.
Is it your baseball bat or is it somebody else's?
It belongs in the house.
What color is it?
It's a blue one. It's right in the bathroom. I'm not even gonna lie. You gotta understand, he pulled the gun out, man. Maybe I was wrong for hitting him with the bat, but I was just...
Anybody else hit him with the bat?
No. It was a situation where we didn't know what the happened. He came there. He came there.
Right.
And he had a gun. I mean, he had a gun, man.
I can say without a doubt at that point, he's not walking out the door.
We'll make it as quick as possible, okay?
Oh,
It's a search warrant for Robert Haskell, blackjack. Good. Can I face that wall? Take these up here. Start hanging. I don't know if you realize, but I don't know. You're probably wondering a lot, but Michael's dead.
he's dead?
Dead. All right. You're getting charged with murder. Are you surprised that he's dead?
Yeah, yeah.
Why?
Well, he left. We took him away from there. He wasn't dead when we left us.
Yeah?
Yeah.
He didn't make it.
Oh, shit. Oh, man. Oh.
Face the wall, baby.
Good.
All right.
Let me ask you this. Your actions in this, right?
Yes.
Do you feel you did something wrong?
Yeah.
What do you feel you did wrong, specifically?
Didn't call the police.
What else? Your actions I'm talking about.
I wish I would have went outside and just told Mike to leave, or just left with him or something. Just walked far with him so that this wouldn't have happened.
So all three of you drive him out to a roadway, set him on the roadway, in the slush, the snow, the ice, and the cold, bound so he can't move or walk away, right? And you thought leaving him there was better, right? By your own admission. That was better for him. How is that better for him?
I don't really know. I just
Well,
in the moment. No, I know.
You know what I'm saying?
Back now it's stupid. I know. I just wanted him away from that house and away from the...
Looking at that interview and watching her, those tears are for Courtney. That's it. Those aren't for Michael. Those are for Courtney.
Through all of that, not once did she ask me how Michael Partridge was doing. Is he okay? Is he alive? Is he being treated for his injuries? None of that.
It solidifies the fact that she has real lack of remorse for what happened to Michael. Beating Michael 30 times with a baseball bat, Bobby is the most culpable. Of the four of them, Seth was the most remorseful. He was willing to plead guilty to the manslaughter in the first degree with a sentence of 9 years in state prison. Timothy Smith pled guilty to manslaughter in the second degree, and he was sentenced to 1 1/3 to 4 years in state prison. The brutal beating that was inflicted upon Michael was so just tragic because he didn't have to die that night.
If the police were called, Michael would have gotten arrested. He would have received drug abuse assistance, possibly help set him on the right path.
Looking at Michael and at his son, who will now grow up without his father, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking.
I would give my last breath just rub my son's head, you know? It's hard. I love you.
I love you.
My grandson, he's doing good in school, and he's such a good kid. I can see so much of his father in him.
If Michael was still here, I feel that he would have gotten his life on track and he would have lived a long, happy life, all with his family by his side. Our memories with him, we'll hold them in our hearts forever.
The morning of March 16, 2021, dawned deceptively calm over the Atlanta metropolitan area. The kind of calm that makes you forget how fragile the world is, the kind that masks the unimaginable. A thin layer of mist clung to the streets of Cherokee County, glinting off the wet asphalt from an early spring drizzle. Trees still bare from winter shivered in the breeze, their skeletal branches stretching toward a pale, gray sky. In neighborhoods across the city, life began its ordinary rhythm, commuters packed into cars, stores unlocked their doors, and the aroma of coffee mingled with the crisp air, promising routine and familiarity. But on that morning, the ordinary would fracture in ways no one could have anticipated, leaving scars not only on the community, but on the collective psyche of a nation. At first, the world might not have noticed the subtle threads converging toward violence. Robert Aaron Long, a 21-year-old man from Woodstock, Georgia, slid behind the wheel of his vehicle, a quiet urgency etched into the taut line of his jaw. His eyes, dark and unfocused, flitted from side to side as if tracing an invisible map only he could see. In his car, there was a calculated tension, the kind that comes not from spontaneous rage, but from meticulous planning. Firearms lay concealed beneath layers of clothing and containers, weapons that would turn ordinary streets and innocuous buildings into scenes of horror. The spring air was biting, yet it did nothing to cool the fevered determination simmering inside him. Somewhere along the highway, on the edge of that ordinary morning, decisions were being made, decisions that would shatter lives and thrust a city into mourning. In the suburbs of Atlanta, spas and massage parlors usually buzzed quietly in the late morning. Today, the tension in the air was invisible, yet in retrospect, one could trace the ominous calm before the storm. At the Gold Spa, one of the 3 locations soon to be attacked, the scent of essential oils and faint jasmine perfume mingled with the sound of trickling water from a decorative fountain. The employees moved between rooms with practiced ease, unaware that a shadow approached, a shadow carrying a silent and deadly intent. Outside, the streets were sparsely populated. A few cars crawled along the lanes, the distant hum of engines blending with birdsong that had begun to pierce the mist. The world seemed ordinary, as if nothing could disrupt the natural order. But in the stillness, the first fracture was forming. Inside the spa, the women who would soon become victims carried on with their daily routines. There was Delana Ashley Yawn, 33, moving between rooms with a gentle efficiency, her laughter occasionally echoing in the narrow hallways, a reminder of life's simple pleasures. Paul Andre Michels, 54, a quiet presence, was organizing paperwork, unaware that any calculation he performed today would be abruptly rendered meaningless. Across town, Xiao Jia Yang and Dao Yufeng prepared massage rooms, their conversations a soft hum of mundane camaraderie. At Hyunjung Grant Station, she arranged towels and oils with the care of someone who took pride in bringing comfort to others, oblivious to the impending nightmare. Suincha Kim, Yong Aeu, and Soon Chung Park, older women whose presence brought warmth and history to the space, moved slowly yet confidently, their years of experience in the business evident in every motion. The sun, pale and hesitant, cast a soft glow through the windows, brushing the surfaces of the room with a deceptive serenity. By the time Long arrived at the first spa, the air had thickened with a sense of impending catastrophe that no one could articulate, yet which would soon be felt by everyone. He stepped from his car with a measured gait, the glint of metal concealed beneath his jacket reflecting a cold intent. There was no hesitation in his movements, no moment of doubt or reconsideration. He moved as though he were enacting a plan already written in the deepest recesses of his mind, a plan divorced from empathy or moral reckoning. As he approached the entrance, his presence was undetectable to those inside, a phantom cloaked in the illusion of ordinary life. The door opened, and the quiet of a morning transformed into the chaos of human terror. Inside, the first shots rang out, sharp and unforgiving. The sound pierced the tranquility, echoing off walls and ricocheting down hallways with a violence that seemed almost surreal. Time fractured in that moment. There was no gradual escalation, no warning beyond the sudden eruption of gunfire. Delana reacted instinctively, ducking behind a partition, her heart hammering in her chest, yet the distance was too short, the danger too immediate. In another room, Paul turned, confusion and disbelief written across his face, a silent question hanging in the air that would never be answered. Xiaojia and Dao Yu froze mid-step, the metallic smell of blood mixing with the floral notes that had earlier perfumed the room. The women's screams, brief yet piercing, merged with the mechanical rhythm of shots, creating a cacophony that would linger in the minds of witnesses and responders for years to come. Outside, the mist had lifted slightly, revealing the muted chaos of an ordinary street suddenly transformed into a scene of carnage. Onlookers froze, phones trembling in hands that hovered over buttons they feared to press. Some fled instinctively, seeking shelter in the uncertainty of the day. Others, paralyzed by shock, watched as emergency vehicles began to navigate the congested streets, sirens wailing a mournful hymn that underscored the tragedy unfolding just doors away. The community, moments ago asleep in the gentle rhythms of daily life, now faced the incomprehensible, a collision of normality and violent disruption that would imprint itself on the city's collective memory. Long did not pause. He moved with a mechanical efficiency, transitioning from one location to the next. Each spa presented a new set of spaces, new victims, and a new stage for his meticulously executed violence. The boundaries between fear and action blurred, the city's streets and the interiors of commercial buildings now the theater of his intent. By the time authorities began to respond in earnest, the scale of the tragedy was becoming clear. Multiple locations, multiple victims, and a suspect whose motives were murky yet undeniably dangerous. The first responders were met with scenes that tested their resolve, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and gunpowder, punctuated by the hushed sobs and desperate cries of survivors and witnesses alike. In the aftermath of those initial attacks, Atlanta and Cherokee County were thrown into a state of collective disbelief. News spread rapidly, fueled by social media, police bulletins, and the inevitable speculation that accompanies events of such magnitude. The narrative of the day was one of abrupt, violent intrusion into lives otherwise ordinary, lives filled with family, friends, and routines. Communities convened, both physically and digitally, to process the horror, to reconcile the incomprehensible with the tangible realities of loss. The victims, many of whom were members of the Asian American community, became the faces of a broader conversation about targeted violence, systemic bias, and the vulnerabilities of marginalized populations. Robert Aaron Long's capture later that day marked the end of his immediate freedom, but the beginning of a much longer reckoning. When law enforcement found him hundreds of miles away, driving as though nothing had occurred, the dissonance between the man and his actions was stark. He was a young man by appearance, unassuming to an untrained eye, yet he had orchestrated devastation with a precision that belied any impulsive narrative. The weapons in his possession told a story of preparation and intent. The distance he traveled signaled determination and deliberation. Each revelation added layers to an already complex case, demanding attention from authorities, media, and the public alike. The first day of March 16 ended with streets emptied, spas shuttered, and a city grappling with grief. Families of victims were pulled into an unthinkable reality, their morning routines shattered, their lives irrevocably altered. Delena's family, Paul's loved ones, Xiaojia and Daoyou's colleagues, all confronted the dual shock of loss and the broader implications of a violence that seemed to target them simply for who they were. Communities convened vigils, placing candles and flowers where words could not suffice, honoring lives ended far too early. Their stories, though personal and individual, collectively formed a narrative of resilience, sorrow, and the urgent need for societal reflection. By nightfall, the city lay under a blanket of uneasy quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after violence, when streets are empty, and every shadow seems to stretch longer than usual. The sirens had faded, leaving echoes in the minds of those who had witnessed or heard of the atrocities. In the minds of the survivors and witnesses, images and sounds would replay incessantly: the glint of metal, the sudden crack of gunfire, the shattering of ordinary mornings into chaos. Atlanta, once again, had become a city of memory, a place where tragedy and ordinary life collided in ways that would not soon be forgotten. This was only the beginning. The morning of March 16 did not simply mark a single event. It initiated a chain reaction that would unravel countless lives, confront a community with uncomfortable truths about violence and prejudice, and force a nation to face the fragility of safety. It was the hook, the opening act of a story that would unfold over months and years, a narrative in which the ordinary and the horrific coexisted, each shaping the other in profound ways. In those early hours, Atlanta's streets bore witness to the unimaginable, and the echoes of that day would resonate. Atlanta is a city of contrasts, a place where glass towers rise above streets lined with history, where the past lingers in the shadows of the present. In early 2021, the city moved through a strange and uneasy rhythm shaped by the lingering presence of the COVID-19 pandemic. Masks had become part of daily life, their fabric barriers concealing not just faces but emotions, fatigue, anxiety, quiet resilience. Businesses struggled to stay afloat, adapting to restrictions that shifted like sand beneath their feet. For many immigrant communities, especially those within the Asian American population, the tension was sharper, more personal. There was a sense, difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore, that something had changed in the social fabric. Glances lingered longer than they should. Words carried an edge that hadn't always been there. In neighborhoods stretching from downtown Atlanta to the quieter edges of Cherokee County, Asian-owned businesses stood as symbols of perseverance. Among them were the spas, places that existed in a delicate balance between visibility and anonymity. They were often tucked into modest strip malls, their signage simple, their interiors warm and inviting. These spaces were not glamorous, but they were essential. For many of the women who worked there, they represented opportunity, survival, and a connection to a life they had built far from home. The scent of eucalyptus oil, the soft glow of dimmed lights, the gentle hum of music, these were the details that defined their working environment, creating an illusion of calm that contrasted sharply with the realities outside. Cherokee County, just north of Atlanta, offered a quieter setting. Suburban homes stretched along winding roads, their lawns trimmed neatly, their mailboxes standing like sentinels at the edges of driveways. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other, where routines rarely changed, where the unexpected felt distant. Yet even here, beneath the surface of everyday life, tensions simmered. Conversations about the pandemic often drifted into conversations about blame, about origin, about fear. It was subtle, sometimes disguised as concern or curiosity, but it was there, shaping perceptions in ways that would later become painfully significant. Within this landscape, the spas operated as both workplaces and sanctuaries. Women arrived early, unlocking doors before the sun fully claimed the sky, preparing rooms with practiced care. Towels were folded with precision, oils arranged neatly, surfaces wiped clean until they reflected the soft lighting above. Each detail mattered, not just for the comfort of clients, but for the pride these women took in their work. Many of them carried stories that stretched across continents, journeys marked by sacrifice, by hope, by the quiet determination to create something better. They sent money home to families, supported children through school, and navigated a world that often felt foreign in more ways than one. The broader atmosphere in early 2021 was heavy with contradiction. On one hand, there was a growing awareness of racial injustice across the United States, fueled by protests and conversations that demanded change. On the other, there was a rise in reported incidents targeting Asian Americans, incidents that ranged from verbal harassment to physical violence. News reports began to accumulate, each story adding to a narrative that was difficult to ignore. Elderly individuals attacked on sidewalks, businesses vandalized, families living with a heightened sense of vulnerability. The pandemic, rather than uniting communities against a common threat, had in some cases deepened divisions, turning fear into suspicion, suspicion into hostility. In Atlanta, leaders spoke cautiously about these developments, acknowledging the tension without always fully confronting its depth. Community organizations worked quietly but persistently, offering support, raising awareness, encouraging solidarity. Yet for many individuals, the experience was deeply personal, shaped not by headlines, but by everyday interactions. A look, a comment, a moment of unease in a place that once felt safe, these were the building blocks of a growing sense of isolation. Against this backdrop, the spas became more than just places of business. They were intersections of culture, labor, and identity. Clients came seeking relaxation, relief from physical tension, a temporary escape from the stresses of daily life. For the workers, however, the spas were places of constant negotiation. They navigated language barriers, cultural misunderstandings, and the persistent challenge of being seen not as individuals, but as stereotypes. It was a reality that required resilience, a quiet strength that often went unnoticed. The physical spaces themselves told a story. Narrow hallways led to private rooms where soft lighting masked the passage of time. The walls, painted in muted tones, absorbed sound, creating an atmosphere that felt removed from the outside world. In waiting areas, chairs were arranged with care, magazines placed neatly on tables, small decorative elements chosen to create a sense of comfort. These details were intentional, crafted to make clients feel at ease. Yet beneath the surface, there was always an awareness of vulnerability. The doors, though welcoming, also marked a boundary, one that could be crossed by anyone. As March unfolded, the weather in Georgia began its slow transition from winter to spring. Days grew longer, temperatures edged upward, and the first hints of green appeared on trees that had stood bare for months. It was a season of renewal, a time when people looked forward to change, to the possibility of brighter days ahead. For many, there was hope that the worst of the pandemic might soon be behind them, that life could begin to return to something resembling normalcy. Vaccines were becoming more widely available, conversations about reopening grew more frequent, and there was a cautious optimism in the air. Yet optimism coexisted with unease. The stories of violence against Asian Americans did not fade, if anything, they seemed to intensify. Community members spoke of feeling watched, of altering their routines, of choosing routes that felt safer even if they were longer. Business owners installed additional security measures, cameras that recorded silently, capturing moments that might later become evidence. There was a sense of bracing for something undefined, a recognition that safety could no longer be taken for granted. Within the daily routines of the spas, these broader dynamics were felt in subtle ways. Conversations among workers sometimes drifted toward concerns about safety, about the changing atmosphere in the country. There were moments of reassurance, attempts to maintain normalcy, to focus on the work at hand. Laughter still echoed in hallways, shared meals still took place in break rooms, small acts of kindness continued to define the relationships between colleagues. These moments mattered, offering a sense of stability in a world that felt increasingly uncertain. Clients, too, brought the outside world into these spaces. Some spoke openly about their fears, their frustrations, their hopes for the future. Others remained silent, seeking only the physical relief that the services provided. The interactions were varied, shaped by individual experiences, but they all contributed to the atmosphere of the spas, a blend of calm and tension, comfort and vulnerability. Law enforcement agencies in the area operated within the same context, aware of the broader trends, but often focused on the immediate demands of their work. Calls came in, were responded to, resolved or escalated as necessary. The system functioned as it always had, designed to address incidents as they occurred rather than anticipate those that had yet to unfold. There was no specific warning, no clear indication that the events of March 16 were imminent. The day would begin like any other, its significance only becoming clear in hindsight. In the days leading up to the tragedy, nothing outwardly signaled the scale of what was to come. The spas continued their operations, the workers maintained their routines, the community moved through its daily patterns. Yet in retrospect, the context becomes impossible to ignore. The intersection of pandemic, rising anti-Asian sentiment, and the personal struggles of an individual would converge in a way that transformed ordinary spaces into sites of unimaginable violence. The setting, when viewed through this lens, is not just a backdrop, but an active participant in the story. It shapes the experiences of those within it, influences perceptions, and frames the events that unfold. Atlanta in early 2021 was a city navigating complexity, grappling with challenges that were both visible and hidden. The spas, the neighborhoods, the people, they were all part of a larger narrative, one that would soon be disrupted in a way that forced a reckoning far beyond the boundaries of the city itself. As the sun set on the days leading up to March 16, there was no collective awareness of the turning point that approached. Life continued, marked by routines that felt stable even as they were subtly shifting. The calm persisted, not as a sign of safety, but as a prelude to something that would shatter it completely. In the quiet spaces of the spas, in the streets of Cherokee County, in the homes of families who would soon face unimaginable loss, the stage was set. The world, unaware, moved forward, carrying within it the fragile balance between normalcy and chaos that defines so many moments in history. Before their names were spoken on news broadcasts, before candles flickered beneath printed photographs and strangers tried to piece together who they had been, the victims of March 16 were simply people moving through ordinary lives. Their stories did not begin in tragedy. They began in quiet moments, in long journeys across oceans, in small decisions made day after day with hope stitched into each one. To understand what was lost, you have to step into those lives as they existed before the violence, to see them not as a collective, but as individuals whose worlds were rich with memory, responsibility, and love. Delana Ashley Yawn was 33 years old, a mother, a partner, a woman whose presence filled a room without effort. Those who knew her often remembered her laughter first, bright and unrestrained, the kind that made others feel instantly at ease. She had a way of leaning into conversations, listening with genuine interest, as though every word mattered. Her life was busy in the way many young families are, filled with the constant balancing act of responsibilities and fleeting moments of rest. There were school schedules to manage, meals to prepare, small celebrations to plan. She carried these roles with a quiet competence, never making them seem like burdens. On the morning of March 16th, she stepped into the spa not as someone aware of danger, but as someone moving through another day, her thoughts likely drifting toward the next task, the next conversation, the next moment waiting at home. Paul Andre Michels, 54, brought a different kind of energy into the space. He was steady, dependable, someone who approached his work with a sense of order that others relied on. His presence was not loud, but it was grounding. Papers neatly arranged, schedules carefully maintained, small details attended to with precision. Outside of work, his life was marked by routines that offered comfort, a familiar route home, a preferred place to sit, the quiet satisfaction of a day completed as planned. People described him as kind in ways that did not demand attention, the sort of kindness that showed itself in consistency rather than grand gestures. On that day, he was simply doing his job, unaware that the rhythm he had built over years would be interrupted in an instant. Xiaojie Yang carried within her the story of migration, of leaving behind one life to build another. At 49, she had spent years shaping a future in a place that was not originally hers, navigating language, culture, and expectation with resilience that often went unseen. She was known for her work ethic, for the care she put into every interaction with clients, for the way she balanced professionalism with warmth. There were moments when she allowed herself to rest, to sit quietly with a cup of tea, and let the noise of the day fade into the background. In those moments, she might have thought about the path that brought her here, the choices that defined her journey. Her life was not defined by struggle alone, but by the determination to create stability, to carve out a space where she could belong. Dao Yufeng, 44, moved through the world with a similar sense of purpose. Her days were structured around work, around the steady flow of clients and the demands that came with providing a service that required both physical effort and emotional attentiveness. She understood the importance of small gestures, a reassuring tone, a careful adjustment, the ability to read what a client needed without words. These skills were not taught in formal settings. They were learned through experience, through observation, through the quiet accumulation of knowledge over time. Outside of the spa, her life was likely filled with the same mixture of routine and aspiration that defined so many others in her position. There were bills to pay, connections to maintain, perhaps dreams that extended beyond the immediate realities of her work. Hyun Jung Grant, 51, was a mother whose life revolved around the well-being of her children. Those who knew her spoke of her sacrifices, of the long hours she worked to ensure that her family had opportunities she herself might not have had. There is a particular kind of strength in that role, one that is often invisible to the outside world. It shows itself in early mornings and late nights, in the constant calculation of what is needed and how to provide it. She carried that strength with her into the spa, where her work was not just a job, but a means of supporting something larger than herself. Her hands, skilled and practiced, were instruments of both labor and care, bridging the gap between necessity and compassion. Suincha Kim, 74, represented a generation that had seen more than most. Her life stretched back through decades of change, of challenges faced and overcome. There was a quiet dignity in the way she carried herself, a sense of history that could be felt even in simple interactions. Age had not diminished her presence, if anything, it had deepened it, adding layers of experience that shaped how she moved through the world. In the spa, she was both a worker and a figure of respect, someone whose perspective offered context in a fast-moving environment. Her story was one of endurance, of adaptation, of finding ways to continue even when circumstances shifted. Yong Aeu, 63, brought warmth into the spaces she occupied. It was reflected in her gestures, in the way she spoke, in the subtle expressions that conveyed understanding without the need for explanation. She had built a life through persistence, navigating the complexities of being part of an immigrant community, while maintaining a sense of identity that remained rooted in her past. Her days were filled with the familiar patterns of work and rest, of connection and solitude. There were likely moments when she allowed herself to reflect, to consider the distance traveled not just geographically, but emotionally. Her presence in the spa was part of a larger narrative of resilience that defined so many of the women who worked there. Soon Chung Park, also 74, carried with her a similar sense of history. Her life had unfolded across continents and cultures, shaped by decisions that required courage and adaptability. In the spa, she moved with a quiet confidence, her actions guided by years of experience. There was a gentleness in her demeanor, a way of interacting that put others at ease. Her story, like those of the others, was not singular but layered, composed of moments both significant and ordinary. She was part of a community, part of a network of relationships that extended beyond the walls of the spa. These individuals were connected not just by their place of work, but by the shared experience of building lives within a system that often overlooked them. They navigated challenges that were both structural and personal, finding ways to persist in environments that did not always offer recognition or protection. Their work, though sometimes misunderstood or undervalued, required skill, patience, and emotional labor. It was work that sustained them, that allowed them to support families, to create stability, to pursue futures that might otherwise have been out of reach. On that day, their lives intersected in ways that seemed ordinary at the time. Conversations were exchanged, tasks were completed, moments passed without significance. There was no indication that these would be their final interactions, that the routines they followed would be abruptly and violently ended. The normalcy of those moments is what makes the loss so profound. It is not just the lives that were taken, but the continuity that was broken, the futures that were erased. Families would later gather fragments of these lives, holding on to memories that now carried a different weight. Photographs became more than images, they became evidence of existence, of joy, of connection. Stories were shared, repeated, preserved as a way of resisting the reduction of these individuals to statistics. Each name represented a network of relationships, of people who felt the loss in deeply personal ways. Children without mothers, communities without elders, friends without the familiar presence that once defined their interactions. In the broader narrative, it is easy to lose sight of these details, to focus on the scale of the rather than the depth of individual experience. But it is within these details that the true impact can be understood. The victims were not defined by the circumstances of their deaths, but by the lives they lived before that moment. They were people who laughed, who worked, who cared for others, who navigated the complexities of their environments with resilience and determination. As the story moves forward, as the focus shifts to investigation and accountability, these lives remain at the center. They are the reason the story matters, the reason it resonates beyond the immediate context. To remember them is to acknowledge the fullness of what was lost, to resist the tendency to reduce tragedy to abstraction. In the quiet spaces left behind, in the memories carried by those who knew them, their presence endures, shaping the way the story is told and understood. The afternoon of March 16th unfolded with a quiet steadiness that gave no warning of what was about to erupt. The sky above Cherokee County had shifted from pale gray to a muted blue, clouds thinning just enough to let sunlight spill across parking lots and storefront windows. Cars came and went, engines humming, tires brushing softly against asphalt still damp from the morning drizzle. It was the kind of day that felt ordinary, almost forgettable, the kind of day that would have passed without notice if not for what was about to happen. At Young's Asian Massage, the air inside carried a familiar warmth. The scent of oils lingered in the rooms, blending with the faint trace of cleaning solution. The lighting was soft, designed to calm, to soothe, to create a barrier between the outside world and whatever stress clients carried in with them. Conversations were low, movements deliberate. Delana Ashley Yawn stood near the front, her posture relaxed, her attention shifting between the present moment and the quiet rhythm of the day. Paul Andre Michels moved with his usual steadiness, attending to small details that often went unnoticed, but kept everything functioning. Then, without warning, the door opened. There was nothing outwardly unusual about the movement at first. A customer entering, perhaps, another face passing through the threshold. But within seconds, the illusion shattered. The man who stepped inside did not hesitate. His movements were direct, controlled, devoid of uncertainty. In his hands, concealed only moments before, was a firearm that now defined everything in the room. The first shot cracked through the air, loud and abrupt, cutting through the calm like a blade. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. The sound did not immediately register as real, as something happening here, in this place that had always been associated with routine and calm. But then came the second shot, and the third, and the reality could no longer be ignored. Delana's body reacted before her mind could fully process what was happening. She turned, instinct driving her to move, to find cover, to escape the line of danger that had suddenly formed. Her heart pounded, each beat echoing in her ears as the world narrowed to fragments, movement, sound, flashes of light. Paul looked up, confusion etched across his face, his body frozen between comprehension and disbelief. The space that had moments ago felt safe now seemed impossibly small, every corner exposed. The gunfire continued, relentless, mechanical. It was not chaotic in the way one might expect from panic. It was deliberate, each shot following the last with chilling precision. The walls absorbed the sound and threw it back, amplifying the terror. Glass rattled, objects shifted, the carefully arranged order of the room dissolving into disarray. Outside, the world carried on for a moment longer, unaware. A car passed by, its driver glancing briefly toward the building, perhaps registering something unusual, but not yet understanding. Then the sound reached beyond the walls, sharp cracks that broke through the ambient noise of the street. Heads turned. Movement slowed. The normal rhythm faltered. Inside, time fractured. Seconds stretched into something unrecognizable, each moment heavy with urgency. Delana moved, her body driven by the instinct to survive, but the distance between safety and danger was too narrow, the timing too unforgiving. Paul's steady presence, so constant in the space, was interrupted by a force that left no room for reaction. The calm, the routine, the familiarity, all of it collapsed under the weight of violence. When the gunfire finally stopped, the silence that followed was not peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the echoes of what had just occurred. The air seemed to hold its breath, as though the building itself struggled to comprehend the transformation it had undergone. But the sequence was not over. The man who had entered as a stranger and left devastation behind did not remain. He moved quickly, exiting the building with the same controlled urgency that had marked his entrance. Outside, the world had begun to shift. People stood frozen, eyes wide, trying to reconcile what they had heard with what they were seeing. Some reached for their phones, hands trembling as they dialed emergency services. Others backed away, instinct pulling them toward distance, toward safety. The vehicle pulled away from the scene, merging into traffic, with an almost surreal normalcy. To anyone not aware of what had just occurred, it might have appeared as just another car leaving a parking lot. But inside that vehicle was the continuation of something far more dangerous, something that was not confined to a single location. Miles away, in Atlanta, the afternoon carried on with its own version of routine. At Gold Spa, the atmosphere mirrored that of countless other small businesses across the city. The lighting was dim, the rooms prepared, the workers engaged in their tasks. Xiaojie Yang and Dao Yufeng moved through the space with practiced ease, their focus on the immediate needs of the day. Hyun Jung Grant arranged items at her station, her movements precise, her mind likely occupied with the many responsibilities that extended beyond these walls. The distance between Cherokee County and Atlanta was measured in miles, but the connection between the two locations would soon become tragically clear. When the man arrived at Gold Spa, there was no indication from the outside of what had already transpired. The building stood as it always had, unremarkable, part of the landscape of the city. The door opened, and once again, the ordinary gave way to the unimaginable. This time, there was no pause, no hesitation. The gunfire erupted almost immediately, shattering the quiet with a force that left no room for doubt. The sound filled the space, reverberating through hallways, through rooms where moments before there had been only the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle rhythm of work. Xiaojie's world narrowed in an instant. The familiarity of the room around her dissolved, replaced by a surge of fear that surged through her body. Dao Yu turned, her movements caught between confusion and the sudden need to react. Hyun Jung Grant's hands, which had moments before been engaged in careful preparation, were now stilled by the shock of what was unfolding. The violence moved through the space with terrifying speed. There was no time to process, no time to understand. The calm that had defined the spa was replaced by chaos, by the sharp, unrelenting sound of gunfire and the desperate, fleeting attempts to respond. Outside, the reaction was faster this time. The earlier incident had begun to ripple through law enforcement channels, alerts spreading, officers mobilizing. But the speed of events outpaced even the most urgent response. By the time the reality of multiple locations became clear, the damage had already been done. The man moved again, leaving behind another scene of devastation. The pattern repeated, the transition from one location to the next marked by the same cold efficiency. At Aromatherapy Spa, the final location, the atmosphere was once again one of routine before being abruptly shattered. Sooncha Kim, Yong Aeu, and Soon Chung Park were there, their presence part of the quiet continuity of the day. They had no knowledge of what had occurred elsewhere, no reason to expect that their space would become the next point in a sequence of violence. When the door opened, it marked the final break. The gunfire echoed once more, each shot carrying the weight of what had come before and the finality of what was now unfolding. The pattern was unchanged, the execution as deliberate as it had been in the previous locations. The rooms that had been filled with the quiet routines of work were transformed in seconds, their purpose erased, replaced by the aftermath of violence. Across the city, the understanding began to form. Multiple scenes, connected by timing, by method, by the unmistakable pattern of a single individual moving through space with intent. Emergency services converged, sirens cutting through the air, lights flashing against buildings that now stood as silent witnesses. The afternoon that had begun with ordinary expectations was now defined by loss. The sequence of events, though rapid, left an impact that stretched far beyond those moments. Each location, each life, became part of a larger narrative, one that would be examined, questioned, and remembered. And at the center of it all was the stark reality of how quickly everything had changed. One moment, there was routine, familiarity, the quiet rhythm of daily life. The next, there was chaos, fear, and a silence that would never fully fade. The first patrol cars arrived with urgency that cut through the stunned stillness hanging over the parking lot in Cherokee County. Tires crunched against gravel and damp asphalt as officers stepped out, their movements sharp, purposeful, but underscored by a tension that could not be hidden. The calls that had come through dispatch were fragmented at first, reports of gunfire, possible injuries, confusion led over panic. But as the officers approached the entrance of Young's Asian Massage, the reality began to take shape in a way no radio transmission could fully capture. The door stood partially open, its frame bearing no sign of what lay inside. From the outside, the building remained unchanged, its modest facade offering no immediate indication of the violence that had unfolded within. But the air was different. There was a heaviness to it, something that settled into the lungs and refused to dissipate. One officer pushed the door open further, announcing their presence out of protocol, though the words seemed to fall flat against the silence that answered back. Inside, the scene revealed itself in fragments. The lighting, still soft and warm, cast an almost surreal glow over the interior. It was the same lighting that had once been meant to calm, now illuminating a reality that felt impossible to reconcile with the space. Furniture stood in place, some of it slightly askew, as though the room itself had flinched. Objects that had been carefully arranged earlier in the day were now displaced, their order disrupted in subtle but telling ways. The officers moved cautiously, their training guiding each step, each glance. Their eyes scanned for movement, for any indication of ongoing danger. But what they found instead was the aftermath. The stillness was broken only by the faint hum of electrical fixtures and the distant echo of voices from outside. It was a silence that carried weight, that seemed to press against every surface. As more responders entered, the scope of the situation became clearer. Radios crackled with updates, voices attempting to impose structure on a scene that resisted it. Requests for medical assistance were immediate, urgent. Paramedics arrived moments later, their equipment in hand, their expressions shifting as they crossed the threshold and saw what awaited them. The transition from anticipation to realization was visible in their movements, in the way their pace adjusted, in the quiet exchanges that passed between them. Outside, the perimeter began to form. Yellow tape stretched across sections of the parking lot, a boundary between those who needed to be there and those who could only watch. Onlookers gathered at a distance, their faces marked by shock, by the need to understand what had happened in a place so close to their own routines. Some spoke in hushed tones, recounting what they had heard, what they thought they had seen. Others remained silent, their attention fixed on the building as if it might offer answers simply by existing. Back inside, the process of documenting the scene began almost immediately. Officers and investigators moved through the space with deliberate care, their actions methodical despite the emotional weight of the moment. Each detail mattered. The position of objects, the condition of the environment, the smallest trace that might offer insight into the sequence of events. Cameras were raised, photographs taken, each image capturing a piece of a narrative that would later be reconstructed. The scent of the room had changed. What had once been defined by oils and cleaning agents was now layered with something sharper, something that lingered in a way that could not be ignored. It was a reminder of how quickly environments could transform, how fragile the boundary was between normalcy and disruption. As information began to circulate among responding units, the realization that this was not an isolated incident started to take hold. Reports from Atlanta indicated similar scenes, similar patterns. The connection was not yet fully understood, but the possibility of multiple locations being involved introduced a new level of urgency. The investigation was no longer confined to a single building, it was expanding, stretching across jurisdictions, demanding coordination and clarity. At Gold Spa, the response unfolded with a similar intensity, but with an added layer of complexity. Officers arriving on scene were already aware that something larger was occurring. Their approach was shaped by that awareness, by the knowledge that the situation might still be active, that the threat could extend beyond what they could immediately see. The building, like the one in Cherokee County, appeared unremarkable from the outside. But the activity surrounding it told a different story. Emergency vehicles lined the street, their presence transforming the area into a focal point of attention. The flashing lights cast shifting patterns across nearby surfaces, drawing the eyes of passers-by and residents alike. Inside, the scene mirrored the disruption seen earlier, but with its own distinct details, its own configuration of evidence and absence. Investigators moved between rooms, their observations forming the foundation of what would become a detailed reconstruction of events. They noted the placement of items, the trajectory of damage, the subtle indicators that could reveal movement, timing, intent. Conversations were brief, focused, each exchange contributing to a growing understanding of what had occurred. At aromatherapy spa, the third location, the response was shaped by the cumulative knowledge of the previous scenes. By the time officers arrived, the pattern was undeniable. 3 locations, connected by timing, by method, by the stark consistency of the events that had taken place. The sense of urgency was heightened, the need for answers more immediate. Across all 3 locations, the work of processing the scenes continued into the evening. The daylight, that had once illuminated the ordinary routines of the day, began to fade, replaced by artificial lighting that cast harsher shadows. The transition from day to night added another layer to the atmosphere, intensifying the sense of dislocation that permeated each space. Evidence markers appeared, small but significant, each one representing a point of interest, a piece of a larger puzzle. Investigators documented everything, their actions guided by procedure, but influenced by the gravity of what they were witnessing. The process was meticulous, requiring patience, focus, and a level of detachment that allowed them to function in the face of overwhelming circumstances. Outside, the communities surrounding each location grappled with the unfolding reality. News crews arrived, their cameras capturing images that would soon be broadcast widely. Reporters spoke into microphones, their words attempting to convey the scale of though language often felt insufficient. The scenes behind them, police tape, emergency vehicles, clusters of responders, became visual shorthand for a tragedy that was still being understood. Families of the victims began to receive information, each notification a moment that would divide their lives into before and after. The process was careful, handled with as much sensitivity as possible, but the impact was immediate and profound. The knowledge of what had occurred traveled quickly, crossing distances that moments before had seemed significant. The connection between the scenes, between the lives affected, became part of a shared narrative of loss. Back at the scenes, the work continued. Investigators traced movements, considered possibilities, began to form hypotheses about the individual responsible. The evidence suggested planning, intention, a sequence that was unlikely to be random. Each location added context, each detail contributing to a clearer picture of the events that had unfolded. The challenge lay not only in understanding what had happened, but in anticipating what might come next. The suspect was still at large, the pattern suggesting mobility, the ability to move between locations with relative ease. Alerts were issued, descriptions circulated, resources mobilized. The investigation extended beyond the immediate scenes, reaching into surrounding areas, into highways and intersections where the suspect might have traveled. As the night deepened, the initial shock began to give way to a more structured response. Command centers were established, coordination between agencies intensified. The focus shifted from immediate reaction to sustained investigation, from managing the scenes to pursuing the individual responsible. Yet within that shift, the weight of the day remained. The scenes themselves, now marked by evidence and activity, stood as reminders of how quickly everything had changed. The ordinary had been disrupted in a way that could not be undone, leaving behind spaces that would never feel the same. The discovery phase of the investigation was not just about collecting evidence. It was about confronting the reality of what had occurred, about translating chaos into information that could be understood, analyzed, and ultimately used to seek accountability. Each step taken within those spaces carried significance, each observation contributing to a narrative that would extend far beyond the boundaries of the rooms in which it was first formed. And as the work continued, as the night stretched on, the understanding grew that this was only the beginning of a much longer process, one that would require patience, precision, and a commitment to uncovering the truth behind the events that had reshaped a city in a single day. By the time the first night settled over Atlanta and Cherokee County, the investigation had already begun to stretch beyond the physical boundaries of the crime scenes. What had started as fragmented reports, isolated bursts of violence, was now forming into a pattern that investigators could no longer ignore. 3 locations. Similar methods. A narrow window of time. Somewhere between those facts lay a person who had moved with intent, leaving behind devastation and vanishing before the full weight of the response could close in. Inside temporary command centers, the atmosphere shifted from reactive urgency to controlled intensity. Maps were spread across tables, digital screens filled with timelines, surveillance stills, and incoming reports. Officers moved between stations, exchanging information in clipped, focused conversations. The initial confusion was giving way to structure, but it was a fragile structure, built on incomplete data, and the pressure of knowing that every minute mattered. At the Cherokee County scene, investigators revisited every inch of the space. What had first appeared as chaos was now being reinterpreted through a forensic lens. The placement of objects, the angles of disruption, the subtle indications of movement, all of it was catalogued, analyzed, questioned. They were not just looking at what was present, but at what was missing. A shifted chair, an open drawer, the absence of items that might indicate hurried departure or deliberate concealment. Each detail was a thread, and they needed to know where those threads led. The same process unfolded in Atlanta. At Gold Spa and Aromatherapy Spa, investigators worked methodically, comparing notes, identifying consistencies. The pattern of entry, the progression through each location, the speed with which the events had occurred, all pointed toward a level of preparation that ruled out spontaneity. This was not an act born in a single moment. It was something that had been considered, planned, and executed with a chilling sense of purpose. But knowing that did not immediately bring them closer to the person responsible. Early leads began to surface, as they always do in the aftermath of high-profile violence. Witness accounts came in, some detailed, others fragmented by fear and shock. Descriptions of a man entering and leaving, of a vehicle seen pulling away, of movements that seemed ordinary at the time, but now carried weight. Investigators gathered these accounts, cross-referencing them, searching for consistency. But memory is not always reliable, especially under stress. Details blurred. Timelines shifted. What one person remembered clearly, another questioned. Surveillance footage became a critical focus. Cameras from nearby businesses, traffic intersections, parking lots, all potential sources of clarity. Technicians worked quickly, pulling data, isolating relevant segments, enhancing images where possible. Hours of footage were condensed into moments that mattered. A vehicle entering a lot, a figure moving toward a doorway, a car leaving in a particular direction. Each clip was examined frame by frame, the investigators' attention fixed on details that might otherwise be overlooked. At one point, a partial image of a vehicle began to draw attention. The make and model were not immediately clear, but there were enough distinguishing features to narrow the possibilities. Analysts cross-referenced the image with registration databases, looking for matches that fit the time and location. It was a painstaking process, one that required both speed and precision. Meanwhile, other leads pulled the investigation in different directions. There were questions about motive, about whether the attacks were random or targeted, about whether there were connections between the locations beyond their function as spas. Some investigators considered the possibility of personal grievances, of prior interactions that might have escalated. Others looked at broader patterns, at the rising incidence of violence against Asian Americans, wondering if this was part of a larger trend. Each hypothesis required time, resources, and careful evaluation. And each one carried the risk of leading the investigation into a dead end. One lead focused on a potential suspect identified through a witness description. The individual matched certain aspects of the reported appearance, and there were indications that he had been in the general area earlier in the day. Officers moved quickly to locate him, bringing him in for questioning. The process was thorough, the questions direct, the scrutiny intense. But as the hours passed, the inconsistencies in the lead became apparent. Timelines did not align. Alibis held under verification. What had seemed promising at first began to unravel. Another line of inquiry examined the possibility of accomplices. The speed with which the attacks had been carried out raised questions about whether one person could have acted alone. Investigators reviewed footage for signs of coordination, for multiple individuals moving in patterns that suggested collaboration. They analyzed communication records, looking for connections that might indicate planning beyond a single actor. But the evidence remained inconclusive, offering possibilities without confirmation. As the night deepened, fatigue began to settle in. Investigators rotated shifts, some stepping away briefly to rest, others taking their place without pause. The urgency did not diminish, but the human limits of those involved became a factor that had to be managed. Coffee cups accumulated, notes filled pages, screens glowed in dimly lit rooms where time seemed to blur into a continuous stretch of effort. Outside the command centers, the public narrative was beginning to take shape. Media coverage intensified, reports drawing from official statements, eyewitness accounts, and emerging speculation. The connection between the locations was now widely known, the scale of the understood in a broader context. With that awareness came pressure on law enforcement to provide answers, to identify the suspect, to reassure a community that felt suddenly and deeply vulnerable. Hotlines were established, encouraging the public to come forward with information. Tips began to pour in, some relevant, others less so. Each one had to be evaluated, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Investigators followed up, making calls, conducting interviews, verifying details. The volume of information was both a resource and a challenge, requiring careful management to separate what mattered from what did not. Amid this influx, certain patterns began to emerge. The timeline of the suspect's movements became clearer, the sequence of locations more defined. There were indications of travel routes, of decisions made between one scene and the next. Investigators mapped these movements, looking for points of intersection, for places where the suspect might have been seen, where additional evidence might exist. Yet even with these developments, there were gaps, moments unaccounted for, questions unanswered. Why these locations? Why this sequence? What had driven the suspect to act in this way, on this day? The answers to those questions were not immediately accessible, but they were essential to understanding the full scope of the. In some corners of the investigation, frustration began to surface. Leads that had initially seemed promising fell apart under scrutiny. Connections that appeared logical did not hold when tested against evidence. The complexity of the case resisted simplification, demanding a level of persistence that could be both exhausting and necessary. Still, the investigation pressed forward. New footage surfaced from a traffic camera, capturing a clearer image of the vehicle believed to be involved. This time, the details were sharper, the angles more revealing. Analysts worked quickly, comparing the image to known records, narrowing the field further. The possibility of identification moved from uncertain to plausible, a shift that brought renewed focus to the effort. At the same time, communication between agencies intensified. Information was shared across jurisdictions, updates provided in real time. The understanding that the suspect had moved between counties, between cities, required coordination that extended beyond standard procedures. Every piece of information had to be aligned, every action synchronized. As the early hours of the morning approached, the investigation stood at a critical point. The initial chaos had been transformed into a structured effort, but the outcome remained uncertain. The suspect was still out there, somewhere beyond the reach of the scenes that had defined the day. The pieces were coming together, but not yet fully aligned. In the quiet moments between updates, there was an awareness among those involved that the stakes extended far beyond the immediate task. This was not just about identifying a suspect. It was about restoring a sense of order, of accountability, in the face of something that had disrupted both. The communities affected were watching, waiting, their need for answers growing with each passing hour. And within the investigation, there was a shared understanding that the breakthrough would come, but not without persistence. The clues were there, embedded in the details, waiting to be connected. The challenge was to see them clearly, to follow them without distraction, to push through the uncertainty until the path forward revealed itself. By the early hours of March 17th, the investigation had reached a point where the fragments were no longer isolated. They were beginning to align, slowly, imperfectly, but with enough consistency to suggest that the breakthrough investigators had been pushing toward was within reach. The atmosphere inside the command centers had shifted again, from broad exploration to focused pursuit. The noise of competing theories had quieted, replaced by a narrower, more deliberate line of inquiry. It began with the vehicle. The clearer traffic camera footage that had surfaced late into the night became the centerpiece of the investigation. Analysts leaned over screens, replaying the same sequence repeatedly, adjusting contrast, isolating frames, enhancing details that were barely visible at first glance. The car moved through the frame with a kind of ordinary anonymity, yet within that ordinariness were identifiers, subtle differences in shape, in color tone, in the alignment of panels and lights. It was enough. Databases were queried with renewed urgency. Registration records filtered through layers of criteria, narrowing possibilities with each refinement. The process was technical, methodical, but beneath it ran a current of anticipation. Every narrowed result brought them closer to something tangible, something that could move the investigation from reconstruction to identification. When the match finally surfaced, it did not arrive with fanfare. It appeared as a line of data on a screen, a name attached to a vehicle that fit the parameters they had been chasing for hours. Robert Aaron Long. The name was unremarkable at first glance, one among thousands in the system. But as additional information was pulled, address, age, prior records, the pieces began to take shape in a way that felt less coincidental and more inevitable. Officers cross-referenced the information quickly. The registered address in Woodstock, Georgia, placed him within a feasible radius of the first location. Further checks revealed recent activity, movements that could be aligned with the timeline already established. The vehicle, the name, the geography, it was not yet definitive, but it was enough to act on. The room shifted. Conversations that had been steady and analytical became sharper, more immediate. Instructions were issued, units contacted, coordination initiated. The focus moved from what had happened to where the suspect might be now. The window of time between the attacks and the present moment had created distance, but it also provided a trail, one that could be followed if they moved quickly enough. Patrol units were alerted across multiple jurisdictions. The description of the vehicle, the name of the suspect, the urgency of the situation, everything was communicated with precision. Officers on the road adjusted their awareness, scanning passing vehicles, watching for anything that matched the details now circulating through their radios. At the same time, investigators began to build a profile, not in the abstract psychological sense, but in concrete terms. Where would he go? What routes would he take? Was he heading toward a familiar location, or moving aimlessly, driven by momentum rather than destination? These questions shaped the strategy, influencing where resources were deployed and how the search was conducted. Information from license plate readers began to add another layer. Data points appeared on the map, indicating where the vehicle had been captured by cameras along highways and intersections. Each hit extended the timeline, tracing a path that moved southward, away from the initial scenes. The pattern suggested not random movement, but direction. There was a sense, difficult to articulate but strongly felt, that the suspect was not finished. That possibility added weight to every decision. The urgency was no longer just about apprehension, it was about prevention. If he continued, if there were additional locations, additional targets, the consequences would extend even further. The need to intercept him became immediate, pressing, non-negotiable. Hours passed in this heightened state. Then came the call. A patrol officer, positioned along a stretch of highway far south of Atlanta, reported a vehicle that matched the description. The details aligned: make, model, color, partial plate. The vehicle was moving steadily, blending into traffic in a way that might have gone unnoticed under different circumstances. But now, every element of its presence carried significance. The officer did not act immediately. Protocol required confirmation, coordination. Additional units were directed to the area, positioning themselves in a way that would allow for a controlled stop. The risk was clear. The suspect was believed to be armed, had already demonstrated the capacity for violence, and could react unpredictably if confronted without preparation. The highway became the stage for the next critical moment. Traffic continued to flow, drivers unaware of the convergence taking place around them. Patrol cars moved into position gradually, their approach measured, designed to avoid drawing attention too soon. The suspect's vehicle remained within sight, its movement steady, offering no indication of awareness. When the signal was given, the stop unfolded with precision. Lights activated, cutting through the early morning dimness. Sirens followed, sharp and commanding, breaking the rhythm of the road. The suspect's vehicle responded, slowing, pulling toward the shoulder in a motion that appeared almost compliant. There was no sudden acceleration, no attempt to flee. The movement was controlled, deliberate. Officers exited their vehicles with caution, their training guiding every step. Commands were issued, clear and firm, directed toward the individual inside the car. The distance between them felt both vast and dangerously small, each second stretching as they waited for a response. The door opened. Robert Aaron Long stepped out, his movements slow, his posture subdued. There was no visible resistance, no immediate sign of aggression. His hands were visible, his compliance apparent. The tension that had built through hours of investigation did not dissipate instantly, but it shifted, transforming into a different kind of focus. He was taken into custody without incident. The moment, though controlled, carried a weight that extended beyond the physical act of arrest. It marked the transition from pursuit to accountability, from uncertainty to a form of clarity. The individual they had been searching for, the one whose actions had defined the previous day, was now within their grasp. Inside the vehicle, the evidence spoke quietly but definitively. Weapons were present, confirming what had already been inferred. Items that suggested preparation, intention, a continuity between the scenes and the individual now in custody. Each piece reinforced the connection, closing gaps that had remained open. As the news of the arrest moved through the investigation teams, there was a collective exhale, subtle but unmistakable. The immediate threat had been contained. The possibility of further violence, at least from this individual, had been halted. But the work was far from over. Interrogation would follow. Understanding motive, reconstructing the full sequence of events, identifying any additional factors, or influences, these steps remained essential. The arrest was a breakthrough, but it was not the conclusion. It was the beginning of a deeper examination, one that would extend into the days and weeks ahead. Back at the command centers, the focus shifted again. Information was updated, timelines adjusted, resources reallocated. The narrative that had been forming through fragments was now anchored by a central figure, a name, a face. The abstract had become concrete. Yet even in that clarity, questions remained. Why these locations? Why this sequence? What had driven him from one place to another, across miles, through communities, leaving behind a pattern that was both specific and difficult to fully comprehend? The answers would not come immediately, but they were now within reach, tied to the individual who had just been taken into custody. For the communities affected, the news of the arrest carried a mixture of relief and unresolved grief. The immediate danger had passed, but the impact of what had already occurred remained. The lives lost could not be restored, the events undone. The breakthrough in the investigation provided direction, but it did not erase the weight of the previous day. As dawn approached, the light returning to the sky in slow, muted tones, the investigation stood at a new threshold. The chaos of the initial response had given way to structure, the uncertainty to a developing clarity. The path forward was defined, though still complex, requiring patience and precision. And at the center of it all was the understanding that this moment, the identification, the pursuit, the arrest, was not just a turning point in the investigation, but a moment that would shape everything that followed. The courtroom did not feel like a place of resolution when the proceedings began. It felt heavy, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Rows of wooden benches filled slowly, occupied by family members, reporters, legal teams, and observers who had followed the case from its earliest hours. There was a quiet tension in the room, a collective awareness that what would unfold here was not just a legal process, but a confrontation between loss and accountability. Robert Aaron Long entered under escort, his presence subdued, almost unremarkable at first glance. There was no outward display of defiance, no dramatic resistance. He moved with a kind of stillness that made it difficult to reconcile the man with the events that had defined his name. His expression remained controlled, his gaze often lowered, as though avoiding the weight of the room's attention. But the absence of visible emotion did not lessen the impact of his presence. If anything, it deepened it. For the families seated behind the prosecution, the moment was something else entirely. This was not just a defendant. This was the person whose actions had fractured their lives, whose decisions had erased futures and left behind spaces that could never be filled. Some looked directly at him, their expressions steady but filled with something deeper than anger. Others could not, their eyes fixed elsewhere, their focus turned inward, as though bracing against the reality of being in the same room. The proceedings began with the formalities that define the structure of justice. Charges were read, each one carrying the weight of a life taken, of an act committed. The language was precise, legal, stripped of emotion, yet each word landed with undeniable force. Murder. Multiple counts. Aggravating factors. The list was long, reflecting the scale of what had occurred. The prosecution moved deliberately, building their case piece by piece. They presented the timeline first, reconstructing the sequence of events with a clarity that had only been possible through weeks of investigation. Surveillance footage was introduced, images projected onto screens for the courtroom to see. The same moments that investigators had studied in controlled environments were now laid bare in a public setting, each frame a reminder of how quickly the events had unfolded. Witnesses were called, their testimonies forming the human dimension of the case. Some spoke of what they had seen, their voices steady, but marked by the memory of that day. Others described what they had heard, the sounds that had broken through ordinary moments and transformed them into something unrecognizable. Each account added depth to the narrative, reinforcing the sequence of events, while also revealing the emotional impact that could not be captured by evidence alone. The defense approached the case differently. Their role was not to deny that the events had occurred, but to shape how they were understood within the framework of the law. They focused on the defendant's state of mind, on the factors that might influence how responsibility was assigned. There were references to personal struggles, to internal conflicts that had been building over time. The argument was careful, measured, attempting to introduce complexity into a narrative that might otherwise appear straightforward. At times, the courtroom felt divided not just by the opposing sides, but by the perspectives they represented. The prosecution emphasized the clarity of the actions, the deliberate nature of the events, the impact on the victims and their families. The defense emphasized nuance, context, the possibility that the defendant's actions were influenced by factors that complicated the notion of intent. Expert witnesses were brought in to address these questions. Psychologists spoke about behavior, about patterns that might explain how someone could move from internal conflict to external violence. Their language was clinical, their explanations grounded in research and observation. They did not excuse the actions, but they provided a framework for understanding them, a way of examining the mind behind the events without diminishing the reality of what had occurred. For the families, these discussions were difficult to hear. The focus on the defendant's internal world, on his motivations and struggles, stood in stark contrast to the absence left by those who were no longer there to speak for themselves. Their stories had already been told, their lives described in earlier stages of the proceedings. Now, the attention shifted, and with it came a sense of imbalance that was hard to ignore. Victim impact statements brought that balance back, if only for a moment. One by one, family members stepped forward, their words carrying the weight of personal loss. They spoke not in legal terms, but in memories. They described laughter, habits, small details that defined who their loved ones had been. A favorite meal, a familiar phrase, the way someone would enter a room and change its atmosphere. These details, seemingly small, carried immense significance. They transformed the victims from names in a case file into people whose absence could be felt in every aspect of daily life. There were pauses, moments when voices faltered, when the effort to continue required visible strength. Some chose to address the defendant directly, their words shaped by grief, by anger, by the need to be heard. Others spoke more broadly, their focus on the memory of those they had lost rather than the person responsible. The courtroom listened. Even those accustomed to the structure of legal proceedings felt the shift in atmosphere. The formality remained, but it was layered with something deeper, something that could not be contained within procedural boundaries. These were not just statements, they were acts of remembrance, of defiance against the reduction of lives to evidence. As the trial moved toward its conclusion, the arguments became more focused, more direct. The prosecution emphasized the deliberate nature of the actions, the preparation involved, the movement between locations that demonstrated a continuity of intent. They argued that the scale of the number of victims, and the circumstances surrounding the attacks warranted the most severe response the law could provide. The defense, while acknowledging the gravity of the situation, continued to emphasize the complexities they had introduced earlier. They argued for consideration of factors that might mitigate the outcome, for a recognition that the narrative was not as simple as it might appear. The decision ultimately rested with the court. When the verdict was delivered, the room held its breath in a way that felt almost physical. The words, when they came, were clear, definitive. Guilty. The charges stood, the evidence having met the standard required. The legal acknowledgement of responsibility was complete. But the process did not end there. Sentencing brought its own weight, its own set of considerations. The question was no longer whether the defendant had committed the acts, but what the response to those acts would be. The arguments returned, now focused on consequence rather than culpability. The final sentence reflected the severity of the case. It was not a moment of closure in the emotional sense, but it was a conclusion within the framework of the law. The defendant would face the consequences of his actions in a way that aligned with the scale of the harm he had caused. As the courtroom began to empty, the atmosphere shifted once more. The intensity of the proceedings gave way to a quieter, more subdued reality. For some, there was a sense of relief, of a process completed. For others, the absence remained unchanged, the outcome unable to fill the spaces left behind. Outside, the world continued. The case would be remembered, analyzed, discussed in broader contexts of violence, of societal factors, of systemic issues that extended beyond a single individual. But within the courtroom, within the lives directly affected, the meaning of what had occurred was deeply personal, resistant to abstraction. Justice, in its formal sense, had been served. But the story did not end with a verdict. It carried forward, into the lives of those who would continue to navigate the aftermath, into the conversations that would shape how that was understood, and into the memory of a day that had changed everything. In the weeks that followed the trial, the city did not return to normal in the way people often imagine after tragedy. There was no clear dividing line between before and after, no moment when everything simply settled back into place. Instead, Atlanta carried the weight forward, quietly, unevenly, in ways that revealed themselves in small, unexpected moments. The spas where the violence had unfolded remained closed for a time, their doors locked, their windows reflecting a world that continued moving without them. The absence of activity in those spaces felt louder than anything that had filled them before. For the families of the victims, the passage of time did not soften the loss in any predictable way. Grief did not move in a straight line. It circled back on itself, resurfacing in ordinary situations that suddenly felt unfamiliar. A chair left empty at a dinner table, a phone that would no longer ring, a routine that no longer made sense without the person who had once defined it. These were the realities that followed the courtroom, realities that no verdict could resolve. Delana Ashley Yawn's family found themselves navigating a world that had shifted without warning. The rhythms of daily life continued, meals prepared, schedules maintained, but beneath those routines was a constant awareness of absence. Her laughter, once so present, became something remembered rather than experienced. Stories were shared more often, not as a way of moving on, but as a way of holding on, of ensuring that the details of her life remained vivid despite the passage of time. For the loved ones of Paul Andre Michels, the steadiness that had once defined him became part of how he was remembered. His reliability, the quiet consistency of his presence, now stood in contrast to the abruptness of his loss. There were moments when those who knew him found themselves expecting him to appear, to continue the routines he had always maintained. The realization that he would not was something that had to be relearned again and again. Within the Asian American community, the impact extended beyond individual families. There was a collective sense of vulnerability that had been intensified by the conversations that had once been private became more open, more urgent. People spoke about their experiences, about the ways in which the world had begun to feel different in recent years. There was a recognition that what had happened was not isolated, that it existed within a broader context that could not be ignored. Community gatherings took on new meaning. Vigils were held, not just as acts of mourning, but as expressions of solidarity. Candles flickered in quiet spaces, their light reflecting off faces marked by both sorrow and determination. Names were spoken, not as part of a list, but as reminders of lives that had mattered, that continued to matter despite the way they had ended. These gatherings created moments of connection, spaces where grief could be shared rather than carried alone. At the same time, there was a growing demand for change. Advocacy groups, community leaders, and individuals began to push for conversations about safety, about representation, about the ways in which certain communities were perceived and treated. There became a focal point, a reference in discussions that extended far beyond Atlanta. It was cited in debates about policy, about awareness, about the responsibilities of institutions and individuals alike. Yet even as these broader conversations unfolded, the personal dimension of the aftermath remained central. For many, the focus was not on policy or public discourse, but on the day-to-day process of adjusting to a new reality. This process was often quiet, taking place in private spaces, away from the attention that had surrounded the initial. It involved small decisions: how to move through familiar places, how to engage with routines that had been disrupted, how to find moments of stability in a landscape that no longer felt entirely secure. The spas themselves became symbols, their physical presence tied to the memory of what had occurred. Some would eventually reopen under new management, their interiors redesigned, their purpose redefined. But the history of those spaces could not be erased. It lingered in the architecture, in the layout of rooms, in the knowledge of what had taken place within those walls. For those who returned to work in similar environments, there was an added layer of awareness, a recognition of vulnerability that had not been as immediate before. Law enforcement agencies conducted internal reviews, examining the response to the, identifying areas for improvement, reinforcing protocols. These efforts were part of a broader attempt to ensure that future incidents could be addressed with even greater effectiveness. But there was also an understanding that prevention required more than response, that it involved addressing factors that extended beyond the immediate scope of policing. Media coverage gradually shifted. The intensity of the initial reporting gave way to more reflective pieces, analyses that explored them in greater depth. Journalists spoke with community members, with experts, with individuals whose perspectives added nuance to the narrative. The story evolved, moving from breaking news to a case study in broader societal dynamics. For some, this shift was welcome, providing space for deeper understanding. For others, it felt like a distancing, a movement away from the immediacy of the loss toward something more abstract. The balance between these perspectives was difficult to maintain, reflecting the complexity of how such events are remembered and interpreted over time. In the months that followed, anniversaries and milestones became markers of reflection. Dates that might once have passed without notice now carried significance. They prompted remembrance, moments when individuals and communities paused to acknowledge what had been lost and what remained. These moments were not always public. Often, they took place quietly, in homes, in personal rituals that provided a sense of continuity. The broader impact of the continued to ripple outward. It influenced how people spoke about safety, about identity, about the intersections of personal and societal experience. It shaped conversations in classrooms, in workplaces, in community organizations. It became part of a larger narrative, one that connected to other events, other stories, forming a pattern that demanded attention. Yet within that pattern, the individuality of the victims remained essential. Their stories did not dissolve into the broader context. They persisted, carried by those who knew them, shared in ways that preserved their uniqueness. Each memory, each detail, contributed to a collective understanding that resisted simplification. There were moments of resilience, too, though they did not erase the grief. Community initiatives emerged, focused on support, on education, on creating spaces where individuals could feel seen and heard. These efforts were often small in scale, but significant in impact, providing a sense of agency in the face of something that had initially felt overwhelming. As time moved forward, the immediate intensity of the softened in the public eye, but it did not disappear. It remained present, a reference point, a reminder of how quickly circumstances can change. For those directly affected, the connection was constant, woven into the fabric of their lives in ways that could not be undone. The aftermath was not defined by a single emotion or outcome. It was complex, layered, shaped by individual experiences and collective responses. It involved grief and resilience, anger and reflection, action and quiet endurance. It was a process without a clear endpoint, one that continued to evolve as time passed. In the end, the story did not conclude with the trial or the sentence. It continued in the lives of those who carried its impact, in the communities that sought to understand and respond, in the conversations that emerged from its wake. The had changed something fundamental, not just in Atlanta, but in the way people understood the connections between individual actions and broader societal dynamics. And in that ongoing story, the memory of those who were lost remained at the center, guiding the way forward even as the path itself remained uncertain. Time did not erase what happened on March 16, 2021. It reshaped it. It stretched through into something less immediate, but more deeply embedded, something that settled into the consciousness of a city and refused to fully fade. Months turned into years, and the memory of that day evolved from breaking news into a quiet presence, one that lingered beneath conversations, beneath routines, beneath the everyday rhythm of life that had slowly resumed. In Atlanta, the physical traces of the gradually diminished. Police tape was removed, broken fixtures repaired, interiors repainted. New businesses appeared, and old ones reopened, their doors once again welcoming customers who carried their own reasons for entering. To an outsider, the transformation might have seemed complete, the spaces restored to their intended purpose. But for those who knew, who remembered, the locations were never entirely the same. There was an awareness that lived beneath the surface, an invisible layer of history that could not be painted over or redesigned away. For the families, the passage of time introduced a different kind of challenge. The intensity of early grief, raw and overwhelming, shifted into something more complex. It became quieter, but no less present. It appeared in moments that seemed unrelated at first glance, a familiar song, a shared holiday, a photograph discovered unexpectedly. These were the instances when the absence felt sharpest, when memory bridged the distance between what had been and what could no longer be. Children grew older without parents, who had once guided them through the earliest stages of life. Milestones were reached, graduations, birthdays, small achievements, that carried both pride and a sense of incompleteness. The stories of their mothers, of who they had been beyond the roles they played, were told and retold, not as a way of replacing their presence, but as a way of preserving it. These narratives became a form of continuity, a thread that connected the past to the present in a way that resisted erasure. Within the Asian American community, the long-term impact was equally profound, though expressed in different ways. There had not been an isolated experience. It had intersected with broader patterns that many had already been navigating. In the years that followed, there was a sustained effort to address these patterns, to create awareness, to advocate for change. Community organizations expanded their work, offering resources, building networks, creating spaces where individuals could speak openly about their experiences. There was also a shift in visibility. Stories that had once been confined to smaller circles began to reach wider audiences. Personal accounts, shared through various platforms, provided insight into realities that had often been overlooked. These stories were not always easy to hear, but they contributed to a deeper understanding of the context in which the had occurred. At the same time, there was a recognition that awareness alone was not enough. Conversations about policy, about protection, about representation became more prominent. Leaders at different levels were called upon to respond, to consider how systems could be adjusted to better address the concerns being raised. Progress was uneven, sometimes slow, sometimes met with resistance. But the persistence of these efforts reflected a determination to move beyond acknowledgement toward tangible change. For those who worked in environments similar to the spas targeted in the sense of vulnerability remained a factor long after the immediate aftermath had passed. Security measures became more common, routines adjusted to account for risks that had once seemed distant. There was a heightened awareness of surroundings, of interactions, of anything that felt out of place. This awareness was not constant, but it was present, a quiet undercurrent that influenced behavior in subtle ways. That also left its mark on how violence itself was discussed. It became part of a broader conversation about the intersections of personal motivation, societal influence, and systemic factors. Analysts, researchers, and commentators examined the details, seeking to understand not just what had happened, but why it had happened in the way that it did. These discussions were complex, often intersecting with other issues, reflecting the multifaceted nature of the. In academic settings, the case was studied as an example, a point of reference for discussions about crime, about bias, about the ways in which individual actions can reflect or amplify broader trends. Students engaged with the material, exploring different perspectives, questioning assumptions, attempting to draw lessons that could be applied beyond the specifics of the. These conversations were not always conclusive, but they contributed to an ongoing process of understanding. Media coverage, which had once been immediate and intense, shifted into periodic reflection. Anniversaries prompted renewed attention, articles revisiting the, interviews with those affected, analyses of what had changed and what had not. These moments served as reminders, bringing the story back into focus even as time moved forward. For some, these reminders were welcome, a recognition that they had not been forgotten. For others, they were difficult, reopening memories that had begun to settle. The balance between remembrance and the need to move forward was not easily maintained, and it varied from person to person. In the broader cultural landscape, they contributed to a gradual shift in how certain narratives were approached. There was a growing emphasis on representation, on ensuring that stories were told with nuance, with attention to the experiences of those involved. This shift was not solely the result of one event, but there was part of the larger movement that drove it forward. Art, in various forms, became a medium through which the impact of the was explored. Writers, filmmakers, and artists engaged with the themes it raised, creating works that reflected both the specifics of the event and its broader implications. These works offered different perspectives, inviting audiences to engage with the material in ways that extended beyond factual recounting. For the individuals directly affected, however, the experience remained deeply personal, resistant to abstraction. The broader discussions, the policy changes, the cultural shifts, these were important, but they existed alongside a more immediate reality. The absence of a loved one, the memory of a specific moment, the ongoing process of adapting to a changed life. These were the elements that defined their experience, elements that could not be fully captured by any external narrative. As years passed, they became part of history, but not in a way that diminished its significance. It remained a reference point, a moment that had altered trajectories, influenced decisions, shaped perspectives. Its impact was not static. It continued to evolve, reflecting the ways in which individuals and communities responded to it over time. In Atlanta, life continued, as it always does. Streets filled with traffic, businesses opened and closed, seasons changed. The city carried its history within it, layers of experience that defined its character. March 16, 2021, was one of those layers, a moment that had left an imprint that could be felt even as the surface appeared unchanged. And within that ongoing flow of time, the memory of the victims persisted, not just as part of a tragic event, but as individuals whose lives had mattered, whose stories continued to resonate. Their presence was felt in the spaces they had once occupied, in the memories shared by those who knew them, in the broader conversations that had emerged in the wake of their loss. The story, in its fullest sense, did not end. It became part of something larger, something that extended beyond a single day, into the continuing effort to understand, to remember, and to move forward without forgetting what had been left behind.